Hi, in this video we'll try and understand what actually Jenkins is and why do we really need it. So now if you do a quick Google search you will find that Jenkins describes itself as a free open source automation server that helps in automating parts of software development lifecycle, right? Which is related to building, testing and deploying, and it facilitates continuous integration and continuous delivery. Okay. Right. So this actually is a very good definition and describes everything that we can do with Jenkins. Yeah, but for someone who is new to software development or who is not that familiar with the steps involved in developing an app, right, this would be a little difficult to digest. Right. So let's go ahead and take a simple example of a web app and go through its development process and see where Jenkins fits in, like which steps Jenkins can help us with. Okay, so let's say you are a developer. You get a client and he asks you to develop a website which takes in your name, and once you click on submit, it returns you the meaning of your name. Okay, a pretty simple website. So you, being the developer, start with the development process. First, you start writing the code. Okay, you decide on what front-end language to use, say JavaScript. Then you decide on the backend language, say Java. Then you decide on the database, say MySQL, and then you decide on a code management tool, say GitHub. Best thing to use for now. Right, then you write your code, and to execute your code during development process, you use IDE, let's say Eclipse. Okay. So once your code is executed, you tested your code to check whether everything is proper or not. Now you need to demo it to your client, right? So in order to demo it, you cannot just go ahead and demo it using your IDE itself, right? You need to make it, make it more manageable. So what you do is you compile the code, and then you get all the dependencies that you have used or all the third-party softwares that you have used, right? And the database software, everything you take it and make executables out of it, right? Make .exe file or jar files, whatever it is, right? Okay, so this process of creating executables, the standalone executables that can run on any place and have your site up and running, this entire process of creation is known as building, or rather build stuff. Right? So you build this. Now once you have built the executables, you have these executables. Now you need to run it somewhere so that it is available to the public, wherein you can just ask your client to click on, go to that link and look at his software, right? So now you need a server where you will do where you will deploy, or rather where you will run your executables. Okay, so let's say you get a Tomcat server and you do the needful. Okay, and this process of executing and getting this server ready to host your website is known as deploying, right? So deployment. Right, so you demoed your website and then the client asks you to uh, include something new in it, right? So let's say he asks you to include a date of birth text, right? So he asks you to get the DOB, and from the DOB, he asks you to uh, extract the sun sign. You can find out what your sun sign is from your date of birth. So, sun sign. Okay, valid request. Good. So once again, you go back to your development process, you write your code, then you'll again build it, then you'll again deploy it. So this becomes tedious, building it every time and deploying it every time. So you think, let's automate this stuff, right? So let's automate this build step and let's automate this deployment step. And in order to automate this, the tool that is very widely used is Jenkins. So you can use Jenkins for building, and you can use Jenkins for deployment. Right. Okay, so this actually is a typical development process, right? But there is something missing from here. That's testing. Okay, for like till now, whatever testing was being done, that was being done by you, done by you yourself. You are the developer. But as your workload increases, you would have less and less time for testing. So so fine. You ask your client, and your client appointed a new testing team, right? So as you have a new testing team, they would not, you know take your entire code base and run it using your IDE and test it then that way, right? So what would they do? They would actually take one more server, okay, and deploy the compiled code or deploy the executables in this server, right? And call it QA server or staging server, right? So this became your staging server, and the server that that hosts your website for the public would be now known as production server. Good. So what would be the process now? So instead of taking these executables and deploying it directly to your production server, you will now take these executables and deploy it first to your QA server, where your QA team would run all the tests, raise bugs, give it back to you. You will again fix those bugs and give it back to the QA. It will again be deployed over here. Okay, so this process will continue until until actually the testers reach a consensus that okay, the build that you have given them is fine, is bug free, and it can be pushed to production. So from here, your code, or rather your executables, your build would move be moved to the production server, wherein it will be available for the public to use. Okay, so again, it will be a second deployment. Okay, and yeah, yes, so you would be using Jenkins in the first build step, in the second deployment step, and again in the third deployment step. Besides these deployment steps, right? Besides the build step or besides the deployment step, Jenkins can also be used during testing stage. How? Say during testing, right? So in testing, people will have automated tests, right? So they will create automation framework, which can be done automatically, right, using Jenkins. So Jenkins can execute this framework whenever your test build is ready. So before this, what was happening is like whenever you would send a build, the build would get deployed on the QA server automatically by Jenkins, and then the QA folk would come in and execute their automation framework. But there can always be a time lag between you know the build and the deployment, or rather between the deployment on the QA server and starting of the automation. Yeah, that lag, say, let's say example, you made a build on Friday evening and it got deployed on evening itself, but by the time it got deployed to the QA server, your office time was over and everybody went home. So Saturday, Sunday was in a way wasted, right? You could have started your automation on Friday itself, and by the time you came back on Monday, you would have all your results ready. So automation framework can be triggered using Jenkins just after deployment, right? So that way, Jenkins can be used to trigger automation framework. So, okay. So likewise, as now Jenkins is being used to trigger automation framework, you can trigger a particular subset of your entire regression suite on every commit itself, right? So every time you do a commit on say a master branch, so every time you can actually make a new build and test it for failures. Okay, by this, by this method, whatever code that you're committing would become bug free in theory, at least. Okay, so the total number of bugs that would be found on QA server or that would be found by QAs would decrease, and this would increase the efficiency of development. Okay, so now you will have one more server wherein, or you will have one more environment wherein you would do this uh, testing of every commit, right? Every commit to get. So this process of testing on every commit is referred to as continuous integration, continuous development. Okay, there is a whole lot of details into this. This is just the skeleton of what takes place. Okay. So yeah, that was your entire development process. Thank you.